Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy has been found guilty of a criminal conspiracy in a Paris court today. On Thursday, the former right-wing head of state arrived in court with wife Carla Bruni to hear the verdict in a case that's been ongoing for over a decade. In it, Sarkozy and his staff were accused of forming a secret corruption pact with the regime of Libya's former leader Muammar Gaddafi and of using funds from an autocratic state to finance Sarkozy's 2007 presidential campaign. According to prosecutors, Sarkozy and his aides entered into a corruption pact with Gaddafi's officials in 2005, with Sarkozy meeting with officials in Libya while a serving minister. In return for financing his successful presidential bid, the Libyan government asked for diplomatic, financial and legal favours, while prosecutors also alleged that Sarkozy promised to rehabilitate Libya's and Gaddafi's image on the world stage. And Libya certainly needed that help. Libya had long been a pariah state over allegations of state-sponsored terrorism, including the 1988 bombing of a Pan Am flight over the village of Lockerbie in Scotland. That bombing killed 259 people on board, as well as 11 people on the ground. And very quickly after Sarkozy was elected in 2007, Gaddafi did appear to be on the path to rehabilitation. In that same year, Gaddafi arrived in France on a state visit, making Sarkozy the first Western leader to extend an official invitation to the Libyan leader. In France, the move was extremely controversial, with human rights organizations and left-wing politicians criticizing the visit. $14.7 billion worth of deals were nonetheless signed. And other Western leaders soon followed, with Spain, Italy, and the United States all rolling out the red carpet over the next 2 years. Those warm relations didn't last, however. In 2011, Libya descended into civil war as rebel forces threatened to oust Gaddafi's regime. In response, Gaddafi clamped down on protesters, killing over 100 in a single day. Citing crimes against humanity, the United Nations quickly passed a resolution brought by France, led by Sarkozy and the UK, then led by David Cameron. What the resolution allowed was a NATO intervention to bring about a ceasefire, but the aim changed quickly, with the US, France, and UK pledging regime change in the country. That was achieved in October that year, when Gaddafi was captured and killed by rebel forces. And Libya has remained unstable ever since, with the country divided between two opposed factions, with further civil war an ever-present threat. Now, in the decade-long trial of Sarkozy, the prosecution was unable to prove that any funds ever reached Sarkozy's campaign from Libya, meaning he was acquitted of corruption charges, as well as charges of misusing Libyan public funds and illegal campaign funding. But France's laws against political corruption are strong enough to make even seeking such a deal illegal. And that is what Sarkozy, who has also been sentenced to 5 years in prison, has been found guilty of. Speaking after the ruling, Sarkozy, who denied all wrongdoing in the court, said this: "If they absolutely want me to sleep in jail, I will sleep in jail, but with my head held high. Those that hate me this much will think they will humiliate me. But what they have humiliated today is France, the image of France. And if someone has betrayed France, it's not me, it's the justice system. I'll fight to prove my innocence." There was one other strange turn of events in this case, however. French-Lebanese businessman Saïd Takieddine had told investigators in 2016 that he had personally helped to ferry suitcases of money from Gaddafi to Sarkozy's entourage during the presidential campaign. He later retracted that claim in 2020, leading to accusation that Sarkozy's allies had pressured him. Later, Takieddine retracted his retraction, and 2 days before Sarkozy's verdict was delivered on Thursday, Takieddine suddenly died of a heart attack in Beirut. His initial retraction remains the subject of an investigation, with Sarkozy, his wife Carla Bruni, and other people close to the former president under formal investigation. All deny any wrongdoing. Dahlia, this all seems like quite a mess, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, what a story. There are a couple of things that sort of strike me with this. The first is this question of money in politics and what does money buy you politically. Now, obviously, the comparison I'm about to make is not like for like, but it made me think about, this idea of Sarkozy having his election campaign funded by Libya and then by Gaddafi, and then he gets into power, and then suddenly France is, the first Western leader to extend an invitation to Gaddafi, and then, billions of deals are signed, and there's a knock-on effect. afterwards. And so you see that one contribution, like think about how much of a great return on investment that is. That one little contribution to a French politician then leads to a complete reorienting of diplomatic geopolitical relationships, which whatever you think about what those relationships should have been, the point is that they were influenced by what is probably, in terms of how much money was actually made from those deals, a very small sum. And it made me think about the extent to which Israeli lobbying has shaped similar diplomatic geopolitical relationships in Britain and in the US. We know, for example, that AIPAC is one of the most prominent bipartisan lobbyists. We know, according to Declassified, that Israel has funded a quarter of British MPs. These things, this kind of level of money in politics from vested interests really has concrete impact on the ground. And the idea that, a foreign state or representatives of a foreign state can make, election determining donations, and that is not going to influence policy in a very dramatic way. When people who have taken huge amounts of money from the Israeli state and then begin to act in bizarre ways where they seem to be consistently denying the reality in front of them, and they try to argue that they have somehow managed to maintain some kind of independence on the issue, it is laughable. And I think this kind of shows how laughable those claims are. And I just wish that this idea of being able to buy politicians and buy elections was not just limited to, the criticism of that was not just limited to pariah states like Libya. I wish it was a more generalized attitude towards the way in which the very wealthy, including people representing other governments, are able to shape our politics in such a dramatic way. The other thing that it made me think about is this question of what does it look like when people who held significant state power are held accountable? This is not something that we see every day. We do not see former leaders, former presidents, former prime ministers having to do time for bad behavior, for irresponsible behavior, for illegal behavior. But this has been something that has been building in France for a little while. Sarkozy is the first French president to actually serve a sentence. And what is quite surprising about it is that some of the kind of the niceties that someone of his stature would normally be granted, for example, not having to be in prison during an appeals process, that has not been waived for him. He is going to have to immediately go into prison. But we have also seen, Jacques Chirac, who was the president of France, was also convicted for embezzling funds. He wasn't sentenced to prison, but he was convicted. Marine Le Pen, similarly, was convicted for embezzling funds. And that's not something that we tend to see. We don't tend to see people with that kind of level of political power having to face the justice system. And what I find so deeply ironic about it is that Sarkozy was very well known not only for having a very hard line on immigration, being very right wing, but having a very hard line on law and order. And I always say that these big Billy Bollocks law and order politicians, it's almost always law and order for thee, but not for me. It's always those ones that you find behind the scenes have been up to kind of the shadiest shit. But coming back to the question of Israel as well, it makes me wonder, imagine if we lived in a political system where our politicians right now, who are currently continuing to sign off on huge funding packages to a country that is at plausible risk of committing genocide, how different would that be if they knew that one day, if they had a reasonable belief that one day they may be held accountable for that violation or for that impropriety? How would that change the way that politicians currently behave? And it goes to show that the only reason that they feel so comfortable continuing to give militaristic and financial sign-off to a state that is at plausible risk of enacting a genocide is because they are so deeply confident that justice does not happen to people like them. So it's quite a scene to see someone actually have to face accountability, and it's something that doesn't seem to be just targeted towards Sarkozy, but it seems to be more of a theme within French politics at the moment that both Jacques Chirac and Marine Le Pen recently have found themselves on the wrong side of.